the following aspects. The first one is safety, then security and peace, worker health, and the surrounding community and environment. To highlight the national commitment to the use of nuclear energy, the government issued Law Number 17/2007 on the National Long-Term Development Plan for 2005-2025. This law stipulates that nuclear power should be utilized with high consideration on safety. And in Article 11, Paragraph 3 of Government Regulation Number 79, year 2014 of the regulation imply the use of nuclear power as a last resource. However, if some conditions are met, such as an extensively study has been carried out, the fulfillment of increasing energy needs, the provision of national energy on large scale, reducing carbon emission, and there is urgent interest to deploy nuclear power, then basically nuclear energy can be implemented. Now we will move to nuclear power infrastructure development and readiness phase. Next slide, please. As you can see from the figure, Indonesia is still at the phase 1 of the IAEA milestone. In accordance with the Integrated Nuclear Infrastructure Review 2021, coordinated by our National Atomic Energy Agency, Batan, currently BRIN. And then now we turn to our net zero emission roadmap on energy sector. Next, please. In line with the government commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emission, we have developed the roadmap toward net zero emission 2060 on energy sector. And our minister already presented the roadmap in the COP26 held in the Glasgow last year. To achieve the target of net zero emission, we have to develop all resources that we have, including nuclear. From this graph, we can see that solar energy is dominated in energy transition. The coal will reduce gradually in 2030, and also the other resource of renewable energy will develop. And from this graph, we can also see that nuclear energy will also become a part of our future energy system. We plan nuclear will be connected to the grid in 2049 to maintain system reliability, and will reach the capacity around 35 gigawatt by 2060. Next, please. I think this is my last slide to summarize what I present before. The effort to address the climate change in Indonesia are represented by the directive of the President to encourage energy transition toward clean energy and green economy. The directives are then translated into 23% new renewable energy and energy mix in 2025, and then 29% emission reduction in 2030, and net zero emission in 2060. The focus of energy transition are illustrated on a roadmap that mandated massive renewable energy development, gradual retirement of steam power plant, and reduction of carbon emission through reducing fossil energy consumption. Nuclear energy is the key to achieve global net zero objective, as mentioned by previous speaker, that it's not only as baseload, but also to provide the clean energy. Working in partnership with renewable energy source and other low carbon options as part of sustainable energy system to decarbonize electricity and non-electric energy production. Indonesia will continue to deepen cooperation with the IAEA in the use of nuclear technology for peaceful use, especially to overcome the climate change. And thank you very much for your support to us in the nuclear program. I stop here. Thank you very much. I pass back to moderator. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Feby, for nice presentation. Next, His Excellency Ambassador.
Very generic planning for energy. So first we looked at the energy demand and how much electricity we need in the next years and a decade and so. The result from that study at the time was the electricity demand will continue to increase at a very aggressive level. So from 2007 to 2020, it was projected to be almost 3 times increase. So it's very rapid increase of electricity demand. So naturally, the government directed at the time to look at what options do we have to meet this demand. And at the time, in 2007 and around that period, the UAE was heavily dependent on natural gas. This natural gas also was mostly an imported natural gas from through the pipeline to the UAE from Qatar, and the percentage at the time was about 65% of our gas that's used in the electricity sector was actually imported. So we were a net importer of natural gas at the time. So looking at to find more gas to supplement this increase in demand was not really feasible looking at the national or domestic resources. So we have to look at options outside. And this is where we started exploring some of the technology alternatives or options that can be deployed to meet this increase in demand. And of course, we believe hydrocarbon, natural gas in particular, will continue to play an important role. But then we also needed an additional one that could supplement this. And we've looked at, obviously, renewables, solar in particular, which we are pursuing very aggressively, as you can see from also our initiatives and our plans that are already operating. But then that's also not enough. We needed some baseload technology, as we heard in the presentation earlier today, something that fills the bottom part of the energy demand curve, basically. And that's when nuclear energy start becoming an interesting choice for the UAE to look at, given the commercial viability of or the cost of such energy, but also the contribution to environment and consider its consideration as a clean energy source. But then, of course, the base load concept of nuclear energy is very attractive, given how the UAE economy is growing, as well as the tremendous increase in electricity demand. So, of course, at the time, we looked at nuclear energy, and we had absolutely no experience previously on what is and how to develop nuclear energy, and there's no infrastructure to support the development of nuclear energy. And as a result of that, the government instructed us at the time, the team responsible for this energy planning study, to evaluate the potential option of nuclear energy. In particular, can we deploy it in the UAE? If we deploy it, at what cost, what requirements, what needs to be done, what infrastructure need to be in place. And that's, I think, when we started looking at the International Atomic Energy as a good partner to understand these requirements. And somebody earlier mentioned the milestones approach, which was at the time a very early stage of the development. We looked at the milestones approach in terms of what is needed to be in place for such program to be deployed. We looked also at other countries' experience and past experience from the global industry around the world. And then we also developed what we refer to on a national level as a roadmap, which is technically a milestones approach customized as an implementation plan for the UAE. It highlighted a feasible schedule for the program if to be deployed in the UAE. It highlighted high-level policy commitment in terms of safety, security, non-proliferation. It also highlighted some urgent items that needs to be started, such as establishment of the legislation, establishment of the regulatory authority, as well as finding a site and start looking at commercial entities or the project companies that will manage and be responsible for the implementation of the nuclear power project. So everything went well in terms of planning and defining the roles and responsibility. We issued the nuclear policy in 2008. That was really the start of putting the high-level framework for the nuclear program. In 2009, we have a nuclear law issued, which also established an independent nuclear regulator. We have acquired a lot of expertise to get the program running and to have that initial capacity with the program. In 2009, we also, late in 2009, the first contract for the 4 nuclear power plants started or contracted, and then 2012, the first unit construction started, and then followed by 3 other units. And today, in 2022, we have already 2 reactors operational, and then 1 already very close to be commissioned. 4th one is also in the pipeline to be commissioned sometimes soon, as well as the status now in the advanced stages of construction. So on the government side, we have a very full-fledged regulatory and safety framework, working closely with the IAEA, with a lot of technical cooperation program that developed and train our people, but also help us in understanding the international practices, implementing international agreements, peer reviews, expert reviews, many of them done over the years. I can recall at least 10 major peer reviews mission that allowed us to evaluate our progress. On the industry side, we have to establish a full industry, basically, that responsible for the project and associated services. We have a lot of people being trained abroad, working in other projects like in Korea and the US, overseeing construction and management of construction project abroad. So this whole project came together, but then here I'd like to mention how important it was to get the assistance and cooperation from the IAEA, but also our international partners, countries who already have major expertise on this. So now where do we fit in terms of 4 reactors? These are supposed to contribute, once they are fully operational, about 25% of the UAE electricity demand, which translates to almost or removal of almost 3 million cars per year in terms of moving to clean energy. So as we started with the operation of the first 2 units, the impact of these reactors on the energy mix, but also on our efforts to fight climate change, has been tremendous shift, I would say, in terms of UAE efforts. Of course, it's also gave the UAE a lot of credits in terms of meeting the climate goals and the international commitments in this area. So I'll stop here, but this is just a rough review on where we are and how we started.
Thank you, Ambassador Hamad Al-Kabi, for your nice speech on the UAE project on nuclear. So we have 5-minute question and answer session here. May I start from the last presenter, Ambassador Hamad Al-Kabi. As far as I heard from your speech, the nuclear initiative started 2007. So if you start 2007, that's an important things happen in 2011, which is Fukushima accident. So is there any pressure which want to stop the initiative, the nuclear initiative in UAE, and how the government mitigate this pressure to stop the initiative? Thank you.
Sure, that was a very interesting time, obviously, because when Fukushima happened, we were at the nuclear regulator in the UAE very close to issue the construction license for the first unit. And as you can imagine, the international outlash on nuclear after the Fukushima accident, it was in the media, the public was asking a lot of questions, international coverage, and so on. So naturally, I remember actually having multiple meetings on this issue to decide how we do this and how to deal with this challenge, right? And of course, when we had the discussion with the senior leaders of the government, the instruction was clear safety, 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 right? And this was really a clear guidance for us. And luckily, we have a very good infrastructure and policy that puts safety at the highest commitment. So it was in the government policy that a program can only be pursued if it meets the high standards of safety. And this is where, in the technical discussion, we decided to see, okay, what do we have so far in terms of lessons learned internationally? And in particular from Fukushima accident, is there any immediate lessons learned that we can take up and implement in the UAE in terms of design, in terms of procedures, but also if there is any additional thing. So at the time, the European started what we refer to as the stress test. Multiple countries started the stress test at the time. So we adopted the European methodology, because it was at the time the most advanced in terms of requirements and also methodology and so on. So we adopted that, and as a regulator, we requested from the operator as a condition for the construction, for the operational license, for the construction license, to have a list of conditions to be implemented as a result of Fukushima. So these are lessons learned, design changes, additional safety elements, and then they are conditional that the operational license will not be issued unless these full list has been implemented, in addition to any additional lessons learned from international discussion. So it was a rough time, but I think if you have a clear policy that says safety first, you can easily come down from that target and implement a very systematic approach to move on.
Okay, thank you very much. Very nice experience. My next question may be to Stefano Monti, if I may. So you said it's about a decade to hydrogen based on nuclear cogeneration. So the question will be, how can we accelerate this? How can we have hydrogen which comes from nuclear cogeneration? I mean, we, Indonesia, actually part of a technical working group on gas-cooled reactor. We follow many of progress here, in which STGR is one of the reactor for this application. But again, how far and how can we accelerate this as single countries or maybe together as a member state of IAEA? Please, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I said during my short presentation, there are different technologies which can be used to produce hydrogen, also with nuclear. Well, typically, we can categorize in two main ones. Starting from electricity or from heat. Okay? Electricity, also the current nuclear power plant produce electricity in a massive amount. So, of course, using electrolyzer, we can produce a hydrogen even today. And as you may know, there are industrial initiatives in several parts of the world, in China, in the US, in Russia, that they want to pursue this way and produce hydrogen even in a massive amount using electricity from the current nuclear power plant. Then, of course, we can do better and in a more efficient way if we use the so-called, you mentioned, the so-called high-temperature gas-cooled reactor. Well, there is an high-temperature gas-cooled reactor, a modern high-temperature gas-cooled reactor already in operation in China. It's a modular HTGR, which, of course, is a promising technology also for hydrogen production. We expect that the possibility to produce hydrogen through high-temperature thermochemical process with this kind of reactor will happen only when there will be a broad, let's say, deployment of this technology. So maybe in a later stage. However, I wanted to stress the fact, and this is true not only for nuclear energy, it is true for energy, for any energy sources useful for hydrogen production. It's not only about the production. Hydrogen economy is a complex issue. It means also to be able to store the hydrogen in an effective way. It's a question of transportation of hydrogen. Hydrogen is the lightest element in nature and can flow everywhere. Even, for instance, the current piping for gas are not suitable for pure hydrogen. It has to be mixed. So what has to be considered when we talk about hydrogen production with nuclear energy or any other energy source is the full economy of hydrogen, not only the production, for which, for sure, the nuclear energy is a very convenient option and completely clean, because there are some other processes with, for instance, the steam methane reforming, broadly used today, which is not completely clean.
Okay, thank you very much for a very nice insight on these topics. So thank you for all the speakers. Really sorry, I'm not questioning Miss Fabi here. It's not that I'm unfair here, but due to the time limitation, sorry, I can only have 2 questions here. Again, thank you very much for all the speakers. A great session we had. So we need to proceed to the next session. So again, dear distinguished guests and participants, we proceed now to the last session. Nuclear infrastructure development, enabling factors and challenges. We have 3 speakers here. First, Ms. Liliana Dulinets. She is section head of nuclear infrastructure development of IAEA with the title The Milestone Approach to Build a Safe and Sustainable National Nuclear Power Infrastructure. And second speaker will be Ms. Jane Geraldo Abaya. She is the Director of Division of Asia and the Pacific of the IAEA with the title IAEA Technical Cooperation Program for Sustainable Development, focused on energy and human resource development. And our last speaker in this session is Mr. Monkey Lee. He's the principal researcher from Korean Atomic Energy Research Institute. He will speak about economic benefits of nuclear programs. Ms. Liliana Dulinet, the floor is yours.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's my pleasure to participate in this section and to present milestone approach to build a safe and sustainable nuclear power program. Next slide, please. Today, nuclear power produces about 10% of the world's electricity, and 32 countries currently operated NPTs. 30 countries also are considering or embarking on new nuclear power program to diversify their energy mix and to reduce green gas emissions. And several newcomer countries are interested in small modular reactors. Next, please. This slide shows the number of reactors under construction. In total, 53 nuclear power reactors are under construction and 9 of them are in newcomer countries. There are 2 units already connected to the grid and operating in 2 newcomer countries, in Belarus and in Arabic Emirates. In addition to these 2 newcomer countries, Bangladesh and Turkey are constructing countries, and Egypt is preparing for the construction. Next slide, please. Nuclear power is a long-term commitment that requires strong national leadership, as in fact the program will need a strong support from the government all along the different phases of the program. A successful nuclear power program requires commitment of at least 100 years. Past experience and practice shows that the lead time for nuclear power program is between 10 to 50 years, including a construction time. The leadership should ensure coordination and broad political and public support. The highest standards of safety, security, and safeguards must be applied, as well as the international legal instruments such as the liability in case of accident, safeguards instruments for non-proliferation, and others. Next slide, please. Following the growing interest to nuclear power, IAEA developed the milestone document. Member states that have decided to start a nuclear power program or to expand an existing one may use this IAEA milestone approach as a program management guide. Milestone approach includes 3 phases. Phase 1 is consideration phase, where a country conducts several studies to make knowledgeable decision to include nuclear power in the energy mix. Phase 2 is a preparatory phase for the program and for the NPT project, and phase 3 is the main implementation phase, where contracting and construction of the NPT is done. It is a comprehensive and phased approach which considers 19 infrastructure issues that need to be developed in order to support the implementation of nuclear power program. Next slide, please. These 19 infrastructure issues need to be carefully thought of and developed. There are physical infrastructure elements such as facilities and equipment, and soft infrastructure elements such as legal, financial, institutional, human, and regulatory framework. The nuclear power program will not be realized if the 90 infrastructure issues are not adequately addressed. Next slide, please. For the nuclear power program implementation, the milestone approach identifies 3 main organizations with major responsibilities. Government, through the Materi, is responsible for formulating policies and strategies and for overall coordination of the program. A regulatory body is responsible for defining the requirements for safety, security, and safeguards, and for ensuring that the requirements have been met by the owner-operator. Owner-operator is responsible for constructing and operating the nuclear power plant. In addition to those key organizations, there are a number of organizations involved in the program with different roles, and you see them on the screen. Next slide, please. Agency has established a fruitful cooperation with newcomer countries. As an example, this slide presents cooperation with Indonesia, country which is hosting G20. You see some of our activities on the screen, such as Integrated Nuclear Infrastructure Review Mission, which was conducted in 2009, and Integrated Regulatory Review Service Mission in 2015, and other activities in the frame of technical cooperation project. Next slide, please. On this slide, you see a peer review and advisory services in the area of nuclear power program that IAEA provides for newcomer countries. First of all, you see there is Integrated Nuclear Infrastructure Review Mission. Since 2009 until now, ENIR mission took place 34 times at 24 member states. Other missions such as SEED, IRRS, IPREP, ISAS, and others are focused on the specific topics which are important for safe, secure, and sustainable nuclear power program implementation. Please, next slide. Apart from the assessment mission, IAEA has other well-developed mechanisms for supporting embarking countries. IAEA provides interregional and national training and capacity building, enhances the understanding in member states of the obligations and responsibilities. Also, agency created 19 e-learning modules for nuclear power infrastructure development. They cover most of the 19 infrastructure issues. Additionally, you can see the nuclear infrastructure bibliography. It is the web resources that collects of all key documents in the additional reference materials for each of the 19 infrastructure issues. It includes IAEA safety standards, nuclear security series, nuclear energy series, IAEA services series, covering safeguards, other IAEA publications that provide guidance on different topics. So next, please. And finally, let me underline that milestone approach is a well-developed guidance for nuclear power program implementation and a framework for embarking countries. IEA provides integrated support to embarking countries throughout guidance, training, and review services. All these mechanisms ensure safe, secure, and sustainable nuclear power program implementation. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Liliana Dulinet, for very informative presentation. Thank you. So we proceed to the next speaker, Ms. Jane Gerardo Abaya. Ms. Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good day, everyone. It is really an honor for me to join you today and address a very important issue of our time and of the future, the sustainable goals of energy. The IAEA is an independent intergovernmental science and technology-based organization now serving 173 member states. It is mandated to accelerate and enlarge the contribution of atomic energy to peace, health, and prosperity throughout the world. This mandate is delivered through the IAEA's Technical Cooperation Program, the main mechanism through which safe, secure, and peaceful use of nuclear technology is transferred for the major sustainable development priorities of the member states. My talk will focus on human capacity building for energy development through the Technical Cooperation Program. Next slide, please. As of today, a total of 146 member states, 38 of which in Asia and the Pacific, are taking part in the TC program through national, regional, as well as interregional projects, including the current ones on SMRs, where South-South, North-South, and triangular cooperation is promoted. The TC program, please next slide, is based on the principle of shared responsibility between the IAEA and member states. It is demand-driven. It is thus designed to address an area of defined need expressed in the country program frameworks signed between the country and the IAEA. Recognizing the need for synergies, the TC program operates through financial, technical, and strategic partnerships. Next slide, please. Nuclear science and technology has been demonstrated to contribute directly to 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, a target that we all share. This slide here reflects the areas currently supported by the program according to the priorities set by the member states. While food and agriculture, as well as health and nutrition, followed by safety, dominates the program, energy, mainly for nuclear power development by member states, is also covered. Any application of nuclear technology requires a robust radiation safety infrastructure to ensure safe use of radiation. The majority of the member states in Asia and the Pacific are non-nuclear power countries. Nevertheless, it is the region where nuclear power development is most pronounced, where 8 countries are embarking or expanding on nuclear power programs, and the technical cooperation support is provided in accordance with the milestones approach. Next slide, please. It is important to highlight that the availability of skilled staff is essential for energy development. Education and training in nuclear science and technology builds a better understanding of its uses for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. It can also address common issues such as public concern about nuclear power. TC program thus builds national human resource capabilities through training courses, workshops, and individual or group fellowships. Expert missions and scientific visits provide the support to develop and share experiences amongst member states. The program also provides equipment and materials to strengthen the capacities of institutions. Next slide, please. Additionally, as you have heard, the IAEA offers a suite of support services to its member states with existing nuclear power programs. The program with UAE is one of the most concrete examples of a journey to success. You have already heard from Ambassador Al-Kaibi about this. The Technical Cooperation Program also supports countries that are developing infrastructure for a program, as we currently do for Bangladesh and Saudi Arabia, and several others. Nowadays, member states have been showing increasing interest in SMRs, and the new interregional projects aim to raise awareness on SMR technologies and their applications. Next slide, please. Specific to nuclear power development, the TC support covers all the areas of the milestones approach, which was presented by my colleague previously. It is designed to strengthen government, regulatory body, NEPU relationship. While the interregional and regional projects provide opportunities to build awareness for embarking and expanding countries, tailored support is provided through national projects. To date, for example, about 1,200 participants have received training through 77 individual activities, including courses, group scientific visits, workshops, and fellowships that are hosted by 15 institutions in 12 member states. During COVID-19 pandemic, most of the activities were held virtually and in fact including specialized topics like waste decommissioning that enabled maximum participation from the countries. Nowadays, we also start with in-person training. Next slide, please. Likewise, there are annual recurring educational opportunities for a master's program or a PhD towards a PhD degree. And several activities are planned in the coming months. For example, like the workshop on economic competitiveness and marketability, bankability of SMR, etc., which will be held here at the IAEA headquarters. And in addition, in collaboration with partner institutions like the Asian Development Bank, we also jointly organize courses on energy planning using the IAEA tools. Next slide, please. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to reiterate that the availability of well-trained human resources is a cornerstone for the sustainability of the peaceful use of nuclear technologies, particularly for energy development. Education can help the general public, the decision makers, and all stakeholders understand the why of nuclear and develop the competence in the use of nuclear technologies. Early education in secondary and tertiary levels can spark student interest in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, the foundations of nuclear science and technology. It is important to start early, create a nucleus, a core group, and connect the nuclear sector with academic institutions. We did this successfully through a regional project for secondary schools in Asia and the Pacific and reached 1 million students in 2019. In fact, we are now working with several member states in the region to continue this initiative to tertiary level to the International Nuclear Science and Technology Academy in Asia and the Pacific. Such strategic approach can overcome the challenges of growing needs, unavailability of human resources, and above all, enhance understanding that can transform aversion to appreciation for all things nuclear. I also like to add that the IAEA's Marie Sklodowska-Curie Fellowship Program aims to increase the number of women in the nuclear field. In the same vein, the IAEA regional training activities for women educators and communicators impartially teach how nuclear science and technology is helping to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals for benefiting mankind. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to close that with this important message that for only through the young and the next generation can dreams be fulfilled and the world can be prosperous with clean, affordable, and sustainable energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jane Gerardo Abaya, for a very nice presentation. We proceed to the last presenter in this session, Mr. Monkey Lee. The floor is yours.
From South Korea. Thank you very much for inviting me to this valuable workshop. I'd like to share with you the economic benefits of nuclear programs from the experience of Republic of Korea. Next, please. This is an overall picture of economic development and nuclear power in Korea. Korea has experienced remarkable economic development over the past 40 years. The per capita income increased from less than $2,000 in 1981 to more than $30,000 in 2020. During this period, number of nuclear power plants increases from 1 to 24 units. There are several contributors to the economic development. I'm sure one of them is nuclear. Next slide, please. The role of nuclear has traditionally been addressed in the framework of energy supply. Today, I would like to address the role of nuclear from the perspective that nuclear is one of the economic sectors constituting a national economy. Economic sectors are interrelated with each other through their economic activities. For that reason, an investment in a sector gives rise to ripple effects on other economic sectors by stimulating their own supply chain. Next slide, please. So I would like to share with you outcomes from several studies done in the past on this issue. The first one is the IAEA publication titled Nuclear Technology and Economic Development in the Republic of Korea. Next slide, please. Investments associated with MPP construction in Korea was roughly on the rising trend over the study period from 1980 to 2005. This trend tells us that investment became more activated as the localization rate was improved over the period. Next slide, please. This slide shows which industries were dominantly affected in terms of output and value added by MPP construction. In 1980, electric power plant construction and finance and insurance are the only two sectors that have seen the most outputs and value added. In 2005, your right-hand side, as the country approached technological self-sufficiency in MPP construction, several new sectors were added to include primary metal products, general machinery and equipment, electronic and other electric equipment, and business services. Next slide, please. This is a sectoral contribution from the operation of nuclear power. In 1980, inorganic-based chemical products and finance and insurance are the only dominantly affected sectors. In 2005, repair, construction, and business services were added to the list. Next slide, please. This is a summary of the study. In 2005, a gross contribution of nuclear power to the GDP amounted to 2.1% of GDP. The incremental contribution to GDP, considering the substitution between nuclear and fossil fuel power, was estimated to be 0.6 to 0.7% of the GDP, which is lower than gross contribution as expected. This means that GDP in Korea would have fallen by 0.6 to 0.7% if fossil fuel power had been introduced instead of this. The next one is the final report